This recording is to help you with integrating sources correctly in your essays for English 101. So, the point of integrating sources is to do so in a way that you can use expert opinions, experts' ideas, and actual words, because you will use mostly direct quotations in English classes. You are using those to support your own ideas and for you to be in conversation with the words and ideas of these experts. So you always want to introduce the quotations with your own words. So you're going to incorporate them into your own sentences even. And you do want to include a sentence before a quote, using a sentence with a quotation, just because you want to establish at the beginning of the paragraph that you are setting forth your own ideas, your own main idea. And then the quotation from a source is just evidence to support your idea. So we have some bad examples all the way to good, and even the better example finally at the end of a single quotation and how it's incorporated here on this slide. If you were going to quote from Plato, you would not want to just have a complete sentence followed by a direct quotation. You don't want to start a sentence with quotation marks. You want to start the sentence with a signal phrase saying who you are quoting. Or you can even use a full sentence before the person you are quoting is quoted, but you would have to incorporate that as the sample in the acceptable example here demonstrates, with a full sentence followed by a colon, and then give the quotation. Notice at the end of the quotation, where there would be a period in the actual source, you save that period until after the parenthetical citation. The better example is here where you have a signal phrase that introduces the quotation after the main idea sentence. So you have the main idea sentence, Plato thinks people should analyze their own lives, main idea, and then here comes the example, but you start before the quotation with your own signal phrase. As he writes in one dialogue, comma, the unexamined life is not worth living. Then wait until after the parenthetical citation for the period, and then follow the quotation with a reaction to or an explanation of the main idea of what you have just quoted. So we're going to see that as we go through more of these samples here. Here's another way to look at it. When you are introducing a source or integrating a source, you want to make sure that you include at a minimum these three parts. Part one, you should say who you are quoting. If there is no author, then you should give the title of the source. You can give both the name of the author and the source, especially if the author is not well known. You want to use a citation verb, which means you're going to use something that conveys the tone of the author when the author is writing based on your reading of the source. So the author argues, or the author insists, or the author suggests. Maybe suggests is not as strong as insists. So choose a verb that will convey the tone that you perceive from the source that you have read as part of your research. Of course, you're going to give the quotation, and you will need a parenthetical citation. That is still part two, the citation with the page number from the source. If you're using an online source, you will not likely have a page number because it's online, and that's okay. We will talk about samples of that situation further in the presentation. Part three is the part after you have quoted a source. You need to give your own commentary, your own reaction to what you've just quoted. Use your own words and your own ideas to express the relevance of what you've just quoted to your own ideas, the point you are making in the paragraph and the point you're making in the overall essay. So that is super important. Your paper should be mostly your own words. You should not quote sources for more than 30%, and 20% is actually plenty. Some students get too heavy with the quoting and not enough of their own ideas are emphasized in the essay. So using the 3-step method that I just showed you in the previous slide, you could create some templates for yourself that look like this. So when you're writing a quotation or you're about to introduce a quotation, you'll need the author's name, first and last name, what source it is. Oftentimes the source has more impact than the author's name, just because the source might be more well known. If it's, for example, a magazine or a newspaper, might be better known than the actual writer of that source. So including both there in the introduction is good. A citation verb could be the name of the source and then just the word writes or insists or suggests. All of those would be good. Then you're going to use direct quotations in this class. We're going to practice that primarily because when you move on to literature classes, quoting directly is really important because we put emphasis on the importance of each word that we are trying to understand, because there are layers of meaning depending on what words are used. So direct quotations will be required. You are not giving paraphrases in English 101 because you are practicing for your later literature courses. And then, of course, after you have directly quoted the source, you need to give the page number of the source, and we will look at samples, and also explain why that quotation is important without saying something like, this quotation is important because. Instead, you might say, it is important to consider, and then give the importance of the quotation. So you could reiterate the main idea by starting with a phrase like, it is important to consider. Feel free to pause the video and read the slides more carefully, and maybe actually write these templates down in your notebook so that you can use them later when you are trying to write essays in class or for homework. Here is another template for introducing sources from a book that is used in lots of colleges. It is called They Say, I Say, The Moves That Matter in Academic Writing. And we talk a lot about plagiarism. You don't want to plagiarize, but what you don't want to plagiarize are the ideas of someone else. But these templates, using these templates is not plagiarism. You're just using the same phrases that are good for helping you introduce the quotations of other people, or even to explain your own ideas. So you're going to see a lot of templates that may be confusing when you are trying not to plagiarize, but remember that using some of the same words like author states, or as the prominent philosopher Plato puts it, comma, and then you give the quote. So you can fill in the X's and use the exact words of the rest of the templates. So write these down in your notebook as well. All right, introducing quotations. We just saw a good set of templates you could use for that. And here is another good example of introducing quotations. You want to use a signal phrase to lead into the quotation, okay? And then use your own words before you quote. And it can be as simple as the author, Malcolm X, writes, and then a comma, and then the quotation, and then here's the page number. Note that again, no period at the end of the quotation. It goes after the parenthetical citation. Here's some other examples. The narrator says, or according to Gregor. One punctuation rule to remember is that you use a comma after the verb that introduces a quotation. Make note that the word that is not a verb, so you don't want to use a comma after the word that. A lot of people introduce a quotation with the word that in place of the comma. So I could say Malcolm X writes that, and then I would get rid of the comma. So either a comma or the word that, but not both because they do the same job. All right, here's another example. You could use an independent clause or something that could be a complete sentence. That's kind of the definition of an independent clause. Use a complete sentence or independent clause before a quotation, but when you do so, use not a period or a comma, but a colon, the dot dot, not a semicolon either. Use a colon. So we have a complete sentence before this quotation, and then we have the quotation itself, and then the page number followed by the period after the parenthetical citation. All right. Next, we're going to look at some sample paragraphs that have quotations, and I just wanted to show you what the works cited looks like before the paragraphs that are citing these sources, because it's important to notice that whatever comes first in the works cited is what I would put in my parenthetical citation. So we're going to look at that a bit, and we are looking at examples of paragraphs that are written using the quote burger method, and I will be sure to put the quote burger method presentation in the notes for this presentation so that you can see how that is done as well. But you start with a main idea sentence, that's the brown. Then the red part is the introductory element or introductory phrase or a signal phrase before the quotation. Advising is a verb, so we follow it with a comma, then the quotation, then the author's last name and the page numbers, then the explanation of the quote in your own words, and finally the sentence or two or three that answers so what. So here is another example of a quote burger paragraph. It follows the same basic ideas, but I will let you watch that video in the link that I provide. Just make sure that you don't forget when you are quoting a source, you don't forget to give your explanation of the quotation, your reaction to the quotation, and explain that quotation's connection to the thesis or topic. Now, do not use the word quote in your essay because it will sound like you are a student being forced to quote someone. And oftentimes students misuse the word quote, so be careful about that. Here is a sample paragraph that has a quotation used. This is a sample that you might see, or the kind of paragraph you might write in your career comparison essay. And you have the topic sentence, but look how the quotation is introduced. According to Rachel Jones, who works as a senior database engineer, then that is what the person does. That is the credential in the red. And then notice that I have some part that is not quoted, that the student has still written himself or herself. And the quotation is really integrated here in a way that is really part of the student writer's own sentence. So that is important to remember to do. Make sure that you blend the quotations in to your own writing. If I were to make a template of this paragraph, it would look like this. So I would have a topic sentence. I would have a signal phrase telling the reader something about the expert I'm about to quote. Then I might have some extra words reading into the direct quotation, then the direct quotation